Your sense of balance, otherwise known as equilibrium, is also detected by structures in the ear. In the inner ear, in a different area than where the sensory receptors for hearing are, you will find the sensory receptors for equilibrium or balance. So remember, the cochlea is where you find the sensory receptors for hearing. The vestibule is this little area here, and I know it's kind of small in this picture, but the vestibule is where the sensory receptors for equilibrium are. And once again, hair cells they're very similar to the hair cells that are in the cochlea, except instead of being bent or moved by sound waves, they're bent or moved when you change the orientation of your head. And both equilibrium and your sense of hearing are sent to the brain through the vestibulocochlear nerve. And equilibrium, also known as balance, is also known as your vestibular system. Another sensation you have is gustation, also known as taste. The sensory organ is the tongue. And on the tongue, you'll notice that there are these little bumps called papillae. And sometime go look in the mirror in like the bathroom or something and stick your tongue out, and you can see the individual little bumps. And you can see that towards the back of the tongue, those bumps are bigger, and then they're kind of smaller up to the front here. But all of those are different types of papillae. Inside those papillae is where you find the taste buds. So the bumps themselves are not the taste buds, but the taste buds are deep down in those bumps. And the taste buds have gustatory receptor cells. And so when you eat something, the chemicals in the food dissolve in the saliva, and they bind to these gustatory cells in the taste buds. And then that sends a signal through a cranial nerve to the brain where you perceive which taste you are eating. So, as I mentioned, chemicals dissolve in the saliva, and these are just chemicals in your food. So this could be salt or sugar or something else. So they bind to the receptors in the gustatory receptor cells, and then those neurons send action potentials to neurons in the brain, and your brain puts together that information in order for you to become consciously aware of whether you're tasting something sweet or sour or salty. Different chemicals stimulate different receptors, and the brain perceives each one of them differently. So glucose, which is a sugar or a carbohydrate, when it bonds to gustatory receptors, we perceive the taste of something being sweet. When hydrogen ions, which hydrogen is it's basically what makes something acidic, hydrogen ions are. When hydrogen ions bind to receptors in the taste buds, we perceive that as a sour taste. The salty perception comes from sodium binding to receptors in the taste buds. And if you think about it, table salt is sodium chloride, so it's NaCl. So when you eat salt, you're tasting that sodium. The bitter taste comes from alkaloids, which are things that are basic or alkaline in nature. And then the fifth one that we know about is called umami, which is also known as the savory taste. And it is perceived when an amino acid called glutamate binds to taste buds in the tongue, or the gustatory cells in the taste buds. And back several years ago, they used to add it was kind of an additive or a flavoring called MSG, which was monosodium glutamate. And the reason why they would add that is because it would increase that savory flavor and it would make something taste even better. And to give you an idea of the umami flavor, think about when you eat a really, really good steak. That's kind of the umami flavor that exists there. They don't put MSG in a lot of stuff anymore because some studies indicated that it could cause potentially cardiac problems in some people, although I don't know whether that evidence still holds true or not. And then they're still doing research because there may be another taste receptor that we don't even know about. And so there might be one that actually responds to lipids or fats that gives us kind of that flavor sensation. Smell is another one of the special senses. The sensory receptors are located in the olfactory epithelium in the nasal cavity. So you can see the olfactory epithelium is located up here in the nasal cavity. And in that nasal epithelium, there are specialized receptor cells. So how olfaction or smell occurs is that molecules from whatever is smelling are airborne and they enter the nose where they get dissolved in mucus. So if you're smelling coffee or smelling a candle, you're inhaling molecules from that thing that smells, and those molecules are binding to these receptor cells here in the olfactory epithelium. This also holds true if you're smelling something bad. So if you're smelling something like poop, it means that there are odorant molecules that are entering your nose. When those molecules bind to these receptors or bind to the dendrites of these sensory neurons, the action potentials are triggered. And those action potentials are transmitted through the olfactory foramina of the ethmoid bone. So remember, these were those holes that were around the base of the crista galli in the ethmoid bone and the brain case. We learned about these when we learned about the skull, when we were learning about the skeletal system. So these neurons go through the ethmoid bone through these holes where they synapse or form a connection with the olfactory bulbs. And the olfactory bulbs were the little flappy things that were kind of on the front of the brain when we dissected the brain. Those sit right on top of the olfactory epithelium, so the information can get transferred there, and then from there that information is sent to different areas of the brain for processing. So once again, it's not enough to just have a stimulus bind to a receptor. The brain also has to be working properly in order for a sensation to be perceived or for us to become consciously aware of it.